Should we do a mirth moment? You think we should do a mirth moment? Oh, okay. I have a couple of great mirth moments here. This is an Irish story. I have an Irish name. Carol and I lived in Ireland for years, so no insult is intended. In fact, this was given me by a priest, this story. I'll try and do it in dialect for you. Father O'Malley answers the phone. Hello, this is Father O'Malley. This is the IRS. Can you help us? I will. Do you know a Ted Houlihan? I do. Is he a member of your congregation? He is. Did he donate $10,000 to the church? Pause. He will, he will. So you better keep those pledges coming on time. Now, we're hearing a lot about politics lately, far too much, in my estimation, but there we are. Thank you. We don't talk politics in Unity. You make your own mind up. We trust the divine wisdom. We'll tell you where to put your cross. Congressman and his wife are in bed one night, and she's awakened by a noise. Honey, she says, there's a thief in the house. Never, never is his reply. In the Senate, yes, but in the House, never. Mrs. Jones is at a reception for the candidate. I've heard so much about you, she says. The candidate is startled. Maybe, but you can't prove it. A politician did a reverse on the floor and voted against his past record. Later, a colleague said, well, Fred, I'm glad you finally saw the light. He said, light, nothing, but I sure felt the heat. Tour guide at Grand Canyon. It took millions and millions of years for that great abyss to be carved out. Well, said a tourist, I sure never realized it was a federal project. Okay. I want to talk this morning about an option that we have in our personal repertoire of responses to life. You know, life demands much from us emotionally, intellectually, physically, and we're used to the responses that we've learned and been taught as children, perhaps. And of course, the two prevailing responses that most of us have are those of what used to be called fight or flight. Either you fight your way out of a situation or you turn and flee from it. Most of my life has been centered around, in part, I don't want you to believe that I've had an over-conflicted life. I haven't. But like everybody else, I've had my times of frustration and conflict, and I've had to think, should I fight? Should I sit here and fight that through? Or should I just move on? Should I run from it? This is the sort of classic response dichotomy that comes into our minds when tension or frustration come into our lives. In the spiritual sense, there is a third way. I call it option X, for want of a better term. But really what it is the non-resistance option. Now, I'm not speaking about national issues here. I'm not speaking about nations necessarily. What I'm speaking about is individuals. Our founders, the Fillmores, said the world will never change until individual consciousness changes. You can't wipe out the hatreds that drive so many people in our world today. You can't eliminate the fear that drives people to flee from their own countries just by fiat. Doesn't work that way. It's not until individuals discover what peace means and the benefits that peace can bring that we shall ever learn to truly cooperate. But we can all make a start, and we can all use that option X, that non-resistance notion, in our own lives from time to time. It may not always be appropriate. There may be times when we think, well, I'm going to make a stand here. I'm going to fight my way through this. I've done that. There may be times when we say, I can't take this, I'm going to run like hell. And I've done that too. But sometimes there's the possibility that we can remain where we are and just quietly declare peace in our hearts and lives, knowing that nothing in truth can touch us, try as it may, try as it will. Jesus, of course, expresses this classic third option when in Scripture he says in Matthew, this is Matthew, the 5th chapter, when he says, you have learned an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's the classic lex talionis. But what I tell you is this: do not resist the person who wrongs you. Do not resist the person who wrongs you. That's a revolutionary utterance in itself. Jesus lives in a time of intense conflict. And yet he sees that spiritually, morally, he is stronger than anything that attacks him if he chooses, as we would say today, not to be fazed by it. He stands his ground and lets the storm burst around him. It's not that he does nothing. He does everything by this non-resistant attitude. He proved it. Now, many great spiritual teachers give us these wonderful so-called truths, and our gurus tell us this, that, and the other. And then where are they when the going gets rough? Jesus proved that he was willing to subscribe to this truly revolutionary teaching when he found himself in the Garden of Gethsemane at the end of his earthly experience. You remember he was urged to flee. He could have fled. We probably would never have heard of him had he done so. He could have fought. He had followers who were armed. We know that from the Bible account. He could have resisted and probably given a good account of himself. But he chose to do neither. He did not flee and he did not fight. This is the true essence of non-resistance. And he did this because he knew that he lived in a transient world, that there were greater values at stake, and that his God, his Creator, would never betray him. He says on the cross, it's been told, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? No doubt, scholars believe today, in his delirium, he was reciting the words of the 22nd Psalm, which would have been well known to him, and these words then constituted the end of that psalm. They don't today. It was a rhetorical device, because it is followed in the 22nd Psalm, if you read it, by a paean of worship to God, who is there always to encourage and support us. That's beside the point. It's a digression, and I do digress from time to time, so let me come back and remind us that non-resistance is not passive resistance. When you mention non-resistance, people often say, oh, I know all about that. The Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma's a title. The Mahatma Gandhi in India. Didn't he practice non-resistance? No, he practiced a very effective brand of passive resistance. Martin Luther King. Wonderful, wonderful person who did such an incredible amount to eliminate the horrors that he was facing and his people were facing. And surely he was no, he wasn't. Passive resistance, and that's different. Both men realized the difference. Ironically, tragically, as we know, both men suffered, even for the exercise of passive resistance. Both met their ends by an assassin's bullet. Both men knew that there was a difference between passive resistance and non-resistance. Both of them knew how to practice non-resistance, but it was more effective with their followers to practice passive resistance, which worked very well up to a point. But non-resistance really, as I suggested before, is really something that has to take place within the individual, within you and me. It's not something that we can practice necessarily en masse as a group. It's something we have to learn to do as individuals. It's terribly difficult sometimes to believe that it will work and that it should work for us, because we feel somehow that, driven as we are by the old notions of fight and flight, we should turn to these automatically or even first. But when we try non-resistance, just once in a while, it's amazing. It's amazing what can happen in our lives, how the tensions, how the stresses lessen, how the fear diminishes, how somehow we feel more comfortable, more at home, knowing that we are worthy of God's love and singular attention as creations of the Almighty. It's a feeling that's transcendent often in the power that it delivers in the exercise. Now, sometimes non-resistance can be comparatively trivial. I remember some years ago I was living down in California, a big city down in California, well, in Sacramento, as a matter of fact, capital city of the state, and I got involved in a road rage incident. Some guy cut in front of me. I don't know what he was doing or what he was on, but he cut in front of me, so slammed on the brakes, and of course I came to a dead stop, and I probably made the mistake of getting out of the car, which I shouldn't have done, but he was so wired you can't believe it. You know, he was in my face, and he, you know, he was ready for a hell of a dust-up. And I couldn't run, and he was bigger than I was, so I was almost obliged to practice option X. I gave the universal sign of non-resistance and peace, indeed. I just raised my hand. And you know, he didn't know what to do. He was so confused. He couldn't hit me, and I had nowhere to run, so he just stood there. It wasn't even a face-off. And he just got meekly back into his truck, backed up and drove off. But, you know, that's a trivial example. How quickly that would have escalated into a major confrontation. Maybe one of us would have been killed. I don't know, maybe he had a concealed weapon that he hadn't drawn yet. I don't know. And yet it passed off, and I felt that I had done the right thing. Now, in other circumstances, I might not have done that. I might have made a fight of it, or I might have run. It's possible. But there's a third option, there's a third way, and not all of the confrontations, thank God, we have in our lives are quite so dramatic and startling and even life-threatening as that. But nevertheless, this option X really can work if we understand what its function is designed to achieve. Sometimes in unity, we like to characterize it by saying, I release it and I let it go. It can't hurt me. You know, when you stop giving something the power over you, it does tend to evaporate. And here's something, by the way, that I need to remind you of concerning denial and affirmation, which is perhaps in a way part and parcel of this. People often say, oh, the Fillmores denied that there was anything nasty, anything evil, anything destructive out there. The Fillmores, our co-founders. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. They didn't say we would deny that pain and suffering exist. What they did deny was that those evil circumstances, destructive events, have any necessary power over us unless we let them. Isn't that true? They even split with Mrs. Eddy, Mary Baker Eddy, who was the founder of Christian Science, in part on this very issue, because she believed in total denial. Fillmore said, no, we don't deny. We don't deny any of the nasty things, the confrontations, the family fights, the horrible encounters we sometimes have in life, the situations that trouble and disturb and even threaten us. We don't even deny that illness arises in the human body. What we do deny is that any of these circumstances have necessary power over us. We can choose whether we want to accept those situations or not. And this is in part where non-resistance comes in. We are non-resistant. We can deny, we can affirm, but we can also be non-resistant. Letting go and letting God. And I know a funny story about letting go and letting God. Little boy, Johnny, comes home one afternoon and he tells his mom, he said, there's this real bullying kid at school. You know, he's really making my life difficult, Mom. And Mom, who is, of course, a truth student, she says, Johnny, you need to practice letting go and letting God. And she explained how he might do this. So a couple of days later in the afternoon, he comes home, he says, Mom, that worked. That kid I was telling you about, I did release him. And I did let him go. Right over the biggest mud puddle in the play area. So that's not the kind of letting go that we have in mind. Anyway, this is an option. And I think those on the spiritual path will perhaps discover that it has a practical virtue, a practical function as well. After all, the great Prince Gautama, who became the enlightened one, the Buddha, it's hard to imagine him under his bow tree, isn't it? Getting up to fight somebody or running away from somebody. He was there in the profoundest and deepest meditation. He told us, just as Jesus told his followers, ye shall do likewise. If you want, you may find that center of undisturbed peace deep within your heart and soul. And when you learn to touch it, you realize that nothing in the external world can threaten you. None of the forces of darkness can prevail over what is essentially the light, the creative light of God within you. And that's really where we stand. It's an option. We can practice it once in a while, see if it works. Maybe it's better for us to really fight our way out of a situation or run like hell. But option X sometimes works, and the more we work it, the more it works, because we begin to sense how invulnerable we are in truth, in spirit, and in fact. Because when we choose not to run or to fight, we find something within ourselves that is infinitely stronger than both those alternatives. It is the enduring, the lasting peace of God, which nothing can ever disturb. And now I'll sit down.